Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Happy Plants series here, brought to you by the Cannabis Certification Council. I'm Adam. I'm a board member of the council, and I'm super excited to bring you this episode moderated by the fantastic Amy Andrle and brought to you by one of our fantastic sponsors, Smokies Cannabis Company.
Hi there. Thank you all for joining us for the fifth installment of our Happy Plant series. My name is Robert Muller, and I'm with Smokies Cannabis Co. We are a proud sponsor of this and the past Happy Plants webisodes. Smokies Cannabis Co. is located in Northern Colorado and has been serving the community since 2009 in the greater Fort Collins and Garden City areas. Our Living Soil Grow is located in Garden City location, but our cannabis can be found across Colorado in bulk pre-packed flowers, cones, and Smokies' very own Little Smokies stash packs, which are 16 perfectly portioned 0.25 gram pre-rolls. Smokies is proud partners with the Cannabis Certification Council because of their continued efforts of educating our community with quality events like the Happy Plant series. Smokies' mission, we aim to be a leader in the cannabis space, championing our community, our environment, and our people in all things that we do. Our vision is we envision a world where the cannabis industry plays a major role in advancing science, environmentalism, responsible adult use, and alternative healthcare options for all. Our values, we value diversity in beliefs and lifestyle. We believe in a welcoming environment for all, regardless of path or journey. We believe in making the world a better place for all. Thank you again for joining us for this fifth episode of the Happy Plants series, featuring Jamal Baker, Rachel Brower, Amy Andrle, and Ryan Wankel. I'm going to go ahead and hand the stage over to Amy. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And welcome to another installment of the Happy Plant series. Today, we're going to speak about what consumers should know when they purchase cannabis and cannabis products, when they walk into a dispensary, some questions that they should ask, and go over some, opinions and thoughts that the panel has on how an individual can have the best store experience, and then also how the dispensaries and the growers can, on their end, help to educate the consumer that they're serving. So without further ado, we have three panelists, Ryan Wankel, Rachel Brower, and Jamal Baker. And I think that it would be best if you introduced yourselves. And before we move into that, what I'm going to say as to how I relate to this topic is my husband and I have run a dispensary here in Colorado, first medical and now rec, since 2010. So very early adopters into the cannabis industry. So we've worked with a lot of different bud tenders, and we've seen a huge array of customers and different demographics. So I'll fill in where I can, but I think we have some experts that can do a really great job as well. Rachel, is it okay if we started with you?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Amy. I really appreciate the introduction. Hi, guys. My name is Rachel Brower. I am a cannabis consultant and also working with the Cannabis Alliance here out in Seattle, Washington. We mainly focus on the sustainability of the plant, keeping the plant pure, and really having a spotlight on people that have a true passion for the plant. So thank you guys so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. This is my second time here, so I'm really excited to be a part of it.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Rachel. Ryan, do you want to jump in and give us a little bit of background? Tell us about yourself.
For sure. Thanks, Amy. I'd like to just first thank the Cannabis Certification Council and, of course, our sponsors, Smokies Cannabis Co. and Boveda, for this session and having me join. I'm looking forward to working alongside these panelists and getting some awesome conversations going. My name is Ryan Wankel. I'm located in Denver, Colorado. I work with a LED manufacturing company based out of Sweden as the cannabis grower liaison. I'm a second generation cannabis grower, multiple High Times Cannabis Cup winner, and happy to be here today.
That's great. Thank you. I'm sure we'll be interested in hearing your opinions on this. Jamal, please.
Thanks, Amy. Hi, my name is Jamal Baker. I've been involved in cultivating cannabis since 2001. I've grown in California, in Washington, grown medically, recreationally, worked in hydro stores, just, generally all around the industry. And yeah, love talking about cannabis.
Fantastic. So, I think that we've been at this now since 2010 here in Colorado, and I know you have a different experience as well, Rachel. But for a long time, I think it's good to say that we've taken some arrows, right, for these other businesses that are now opening up, and everybody will continue to do things a little bit differently. Maybe each of the panelists can talk a bit about questions that they think a new consumer should ask. I imagine that people come to you often and, I'm going to take a friend to a dispensary. Where should I go? And how do I identify that? And, if we can just sort of start a conversation around that, and what are your first steps? Because there's so much to know. There's such an immense amount of information that we expect the consumer to pick up on really quickly. And there's an element of trust that they need to find, because they need to be directed to the proper purchase for themselves when they get into the dispensary. So I don't know who wants to start. I know, Rachel, you actually do a training program on this. So I defer to you first.
Absolutely. Thank you, Amy. So yeah, I always, when I'm talking to a first timer, there's a lot of fear that comes into walking into a dispensary, right? I always say that consumer is very vulnerable. We don't want to take advantage of that, because at the end of the day, we've been recreationally legal or adult use legal since 2015. At the end of the day, people aren't really coming in just to get high anymore, right? They're really trying to come in and be medicinally treated, even though they can't have that medicinal conversation, right? So how do you kind of pinpoint the needs of the consumer without going into detail and kind of overstepping that line of being a medicinal conversation versus just having a conversation like you would with a friend? I always say transparency is important. Even though you can't ask certain questions, if you allow the customer to, you build that rapport in the beginning before you start going into talking about products and things of that nature, you kind of break down a little bit more of that barrier, right? And then they start to open up and talk to you. So you don't have to necessarily say, do you have anxiety? Do you have issues sleeping? They'll tell you if they trust you, right? So just talking to them and treating them like a normal consumer or a normal person, if you will, they'll tell you what they need. And then based off their suggestions, you can pick products which tie into the upsell as well. When it comes to talking to the consumer, especially that first time consumer, but they want to trust you ultimately, and building the rapport is basically what that boils down to.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, because I know we talk to our new staff when they're coming on board about how just listen to what it is that they're telling you, why they showed up there, what is it that they're trying to achieve, right? What is the goal that they want from this? And they'll start to give that to you, and then you can kind of help to direct them. But I want to same question for you, Jamal. What do you think?
Yeah, I kind of resonated with earlier today. I went to the meat counter to get some beef from Whole Foods, and I basically struck up a conversation with the butcher. I had a couple options. I said, is it this one or this one? What would you recommend? I went over to the buffalo wings. Is this something that you would like? Kind of just ask them personally in that sort of way. Also, I would almost relate it to, like, for example, for me, if I was going to a dispensary in my area, I would know exactly what I wanted. But for example, if I went on vacation somewhere, there's really no way I would know, one thing from the other. So it's kind of, you kind of have to have an idea of, the situation that you'll be consuming it in, and then to kind of have, somewhat of an idea. And then, I like to have a couple different options, and then you can ask your bud tender, this way or this way, and they can kind of, give you a little bit more guidance.
Ryan, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, both panelists, both Rachel and Jamal, touched on some really great points. For me, I start to dig into more when I do find a product, and I know it's hard to start from somewhere, but when you're finding a product and getting educated from the bud tender and then asking the right cultivation questions for myself. Personally, I have a few, I know what products that I enjoy, and I know typically how those products are produced. So I can go in there and ask on those specific, is this grown, in an outdoor and greenhouse versus an indoor? I mean, some of these basic, simple questions, and then understanding you might not be happy with that sort of product or style from that product. I mean, strain, but cultivation practices come a lot to it. Similar to like if you are going to that, that counter to go get your piece of meat, some people are going to buy the organic produce. And maybe they're looking for specific labeling, and it starts to change in markets, because you do see, very immature markets that a lot of times the only thing that people have to gravitate towards is that THC percentage. But as Rachel points out, it's not about people sometimes just going in to get high now. It's, looking for, ailments and all sorts of other benefits. So that THC number, I always say to kind of beware. I mean, it can be a good reference point, but those, I think, reference points are the best way to go on understanding, kind of where to go from there.
Okay. Well, and so to follow this up, I think, about what I do when I have a friend that comes to town and they ask and they want to check out. Yeah, of course they're going to come to our dispensary and see what I do. But I encourage them to go other places, because I want them to know that it's wonderful that you want to support me and you want to come in here and see this. But if you live in a different state where this doesn't exist, go and check it out and see what offerings there are and see what's different about what the education you're getting at our dispensary versus somewhere else, and what kind of products are on our shelves versus somewhere else. So, do you all have a similar story, or is there something that you want to speak to about when you have someone that comes to you and says, okay, take me, I want to see what this is about? How do you react to that for them?
I always like to react with excitement, right? A lot of the time, people have that barrier up, especially those first time users. I mean, my grandparents, who have always been very adamant about standing against cannabis, are now really embracing what I do out here, and now are actually using products, something I never thought I would see like in my lifetime, because they're starting to be open-minded and wanting to be educated. And you're exactly right, Amy, like go out and get that experience from all different places. So you know how it's done. I love going to other dispensaries around the area so I can see what they're doing and be like, man, that would really benefit in our dispensary. Or be like, that's why we're setting a standard at our dispensary, and we're holding people accountable and having great customer service and having educated bud tenders, so that we don't have that kind of feeling at some dispensaries that have to offer, that are just trying to push that product out the door, versus understanding the true benefit of having that relationship with your consumer.
Jamal or Ryan, do you want to add anything to that? You're good?
Yeah, no, I think the passion is key when you go into these places. Now, some people do not want that experience. Some people would rather kind of have the number, be it, treated like a number and going through the system and get their product, but so each person's going to kind of ask for a different user experience in a sense. For me, I want to be educated. I want to go in there and see a passionate team, because I feel like if it's a passionate team, a good work environment, typically it relays down into the products as well. So I think that's really important. And then, as you said, Amy, when of course it's nice for them to support your store and stuff, but it's great when people can go and get their different experience outside of your store and maybe bring you feedback, or be like, I don't want to go anywhere else, I want to come back there. But I think when you're going to these different stores, or going to, educate yourself, not feeling pressure. The most thing is you go into these places and you feel the pressure to purchase something that, maybe is not your exact fit. And I think that, for myself, I don't want to feel pressure to, I work hard for my money, and I think that everybody else does too. And I think when you're a consumer and you're not happy with the experience, maybe going in there, it can also relate to your experience with the product as well.
Yeah, I think what we all recognize too is that there's so many different kinds of consumers, and we could talk about each of them, right? The first time shopper, but I want to touch on one particular type of consumer, which is sort of the THC potency hunter. And how do you, again, there's so much to teach a consumer when they're starting, from the strains and the ways that they can ingest and et cetera. And they get a hold of this number. Oh, well, it's got 28% THC and this one only has 16%. And so this one must be better. Now, I think we will all agree that that's not fact. But how do you correct somebody when that's their thinking? What do you train your bud tenders to do, or what do you talk to your friends about when it comes to potency hunters?
I'll jump on in this one. I mean, I'd say a lot of potency has to do with terpenes and, the type of high that you're looking for. And you almost have to like take somebody's hand with them and smoke something with them that has these different types of highs, so that it's not that one is better than the other, but that they're all just kind of different. And, one is more narcotic and one is more uplifting, and, all these different terms. And, as we go legal, the terms kind of change, but we're still describing the same thing. So it's kind of like the vocabulary is kind of shifting, but in reality, it is my opinion that they're not, that they all just vary in different ways, and that some are stronger than others, but it's much less a stronger and weaker than it is just different chemicals that you're consuming.
Rachel?
Yeah, I would definitely like to agree with you on that, Jamal, too. I always explain to my team, I talk to them like Power Rangers. That seems to be like the era that people seem to understand, right? You can have your THC, which is the green Power Ranger, and your red one, which is CBD, but you really need all of the experience in order to really fight those ailments, right? People can just really relate to that. They're like, yeah, that makes sense. I also bring up, we just had a lab recently that got violation or cited for a violation because they were packing their THC percentages, which was not great for the lab, of course, but it was really an opportunity for us to kind of maintain control over that conversation, and then direct it into that conversation of like, you need those additional cannabinoids and terpenes for that experience you're trying to achieve. It's not.
And I am not hearing Rachel anymore. Is that happening to anyone else?
Yeah, it seems like she was skipping a little bit.
Yeah.
Ah, perfect. There we go. I think we're getting you back.
Perfect. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Keep going. I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying that that it's just really important to have that conversation and give it something that they can relate to. When you go to them with terminology like cannabinoids and terpenes and things, that sometimes that first time consumer or that new consumer, not necessarily the first time user, is not familiar with that type of terminology. So that's why I kind of lean on that Power Ranger metaphor, if you will, for them to get something to relate to. And that can vary depending on the age demographic you're speaking to. But that's pretty much kind of how we are able to overcome that obstacle of percentage conversation here up here in Seattle.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that, a lot of markets, of course, trend towards that, and a lot of businesses, especially micro cultivators in Canada who are selling to, larger LP producers, they won't even look at their product if it's not over 20%. So it's taken a long time. I would say that in Colorado, once we started getting the testing, now it's been 11 years pretty much working into the market. And just now I feel like consumers have started to trend in, at least in more of these more mature markets, to understanding that it is more of a synergistic effect of all of these, chemicals within the plant. And then more immature markets still trending towards that huge THC number.
Yeah.
And then I think from cultivation standpoint, you do with the fudging of the numbers and things like that. You experience it firsthand when you're within, in cultivation things, and you have these contractual agreements with these lab producers, and typically they will boost up numbers right when your contract's ending. So if you're getting the results that you want to hear, then you'll typically, sign up for continue that contract with them. So it is a business thing, and I hope the market continues to trend slightly away from that benchmark.
Well, and I think, yeah, people are first, they've learned about THC and they understand that and they relate it to potency, but there is something happening now in terms of a movement where people are starting to talk more about terpenes. They are talking about the entourage effect. Now they've heard of CBD, now next one CBN. Like folks are starting to put this together, but unfortunately it's a huge amount of information for someone to take in initially. I feel as though the responsibility to come away from that, potency hunting for these consumers that have been smoking and are comfortable smoking, really, they just need to pick up on it and educate themselves a little bit better. But the first timer, that's almost too much to take in initially. So I kind of turn around to this other analogy that I've used before, which is, you and I and all of us, we can walk into a store with our money, and what we want to buy drives what that store puts on the shelves, right? They want to sell what it is that we want to buy. But with cannabis, there's still I'm coming in with my handful of money and oh my God, I can't even believe I can purchase cannabis legally, right? And so they're so happy that they're waiting to be told what they should get, even more so than in a lot of other industries. And there is a subset of our industry and Cannabis Certification Council, and we're working towards that with getting the consumer to ask, okay, what's in my weed? Or is there a certification, a stamp that tells me that I know that this is cultivated, under circumstances that I would expect for any of my other fruits, vegetables, etc. Right? And like, how is that shaping up? And what do you guys see as other opportunities for, something else like the what's in my weed? What is it going to take for consumers to have that check on the product that says this is good to go, besides testing? Because we know testing is a little, right? So anyway.
I mean, I think it's a large challenge. If you look at liquor and wine industry, they allow for consumption typically on site, and we really don't see any ways that that's going to start trending, towards those for that first consumer. But I would look, towards those the social aspect, and a lot of the times it's you go into that that micro brewery, and even though it's an IPA and you love IPAs, every IPA is slightly different. So sometimes if they'll give you a little taste of it, and unfortunately we can't have that aspect. But I think of asking and knowing the right questions, I think that it's going to continue to help in understanding how it's being cultivated and produced, just like your food. But it's going to take a lot more research, I would say, in general, to have what's going to be the best way, to give that official stamp of approval.
Yeah, I mean, I would kind of add that, all the things that Ryan said, 100%. And also, the black market, for all of its flaws, people have their person, they went to their person's house, they got to try different things, they got to talk about it. Those are really powerful marketing techniques. And until the rec market shows, respect for, all of those relationships, because those were powerful relationships. All these, all of us had our guy, or we were the guy or the girl or whoever, those were relationships that were, important. And, just to sell somebody a product is a completely different thing. And so you're trying to teach these people how to be like Saul from Pineapple Express, how to be Smokey, how to be all of these, integral characters in our society and pop culture. And so until the powers that be see it as just another product that they can sell, but know that this is different. And, it really does come down to, consumption, on-site consumption, where two people are sharing it and they're sharing in that experience, similar to wine. Where you try it and they explain to you why this bottle is $1,000 and this bottle is $100. Without that, it's really hard for you to really get the difference. You can try, and some people do, but not for everybody.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that one too, for sure, Jamal. Also, it's just like normalization of this industry, right? We have so many rules, regulations, and restrictions that are so different from, say, the liquor industry and things of that nature that just really prevent us from having open consumption or, things of that nature. So it's like, what do I have control over as far as I don't have control over that consumer, but I do possibly have control over making sure my team is educated. And what does that look like? Not everybody's going to want to sit in front of a TV or learn YouTube or read a book, right? So what I would do is we have samples, educational samples and things of that nature that we give to our teams. But I would have smoke sessions at my home. I would host smoke sessions at my house. Everybody bring their own munchies, and we would sit down and actually enjoy those samples together. Open that conversation, have that dialogue, and we'd actually also go over like laws that we're going to be passing in Olympia or things that are coming up when it came to legislation for our plant, and making sure that they're educated and knowing what they're voting for to help support this plant become more normal, not just in Washington, but all over. So I really think it boils down to the normalization and just having the same rules and regulations that these other like the legal industry or the liquor industry and things of that nature have as well.
Yeah, I look to some cheats when I go in for stamps of approval, because you don't see it on the board, on the board right when you walk into there. Passionate employees, finding passionate employees, I think is key to your user experience. And usually if they're passionate about their product, they're probably consuming their own. When I go, out of town, of course, asking somebody, where they're going and things like that. But if you don't have that luxury, one of my other cheats that I use is I look to see if other industry employees are shopping there. That's usually the best sign. If I go into a spot, all the cultivators are going to this one dispensary. Granted, you don't want to be maybe a sheep and follow like everybody, but then you start to understand, okay, well, if these guys who are in charge of the farming are going to here, not shopping at their own stores, but going here, they understand the ins and outs of what it takes to farm, what it takes to good, what corners that you can cut. One of my greatest things is, working, as the liaison with Heliospectra now is traveling, and all of these growers have now kind of spawned off into all of these different areas that are legalizing and becoming cultivators. And every time I mention the previous place that I worked for, they all say, oh, we smoked your product. We loved your flower. All the industry people, would shop at our store. So for me, it's a good cheat. If you go in there and you see a lot of industry people, probably a good sign that, they probably have at least some sort of good product in mind that they're looking for.
So getting into thank you for that, by the way, and getting into some real questions that people can ask that we can go back to. Something we've all said is, where was this cultivated? Who grew this product? How was this product grown? And I think that, if you're explaining to a novice why that question is important, it's because of the quality of the grower and how they're growing. I mean, we maintain a clean green certification here. We have a certifiably green designation for our sustainability. I mean, there are some accolades that a newbie, right, could look for to help to differentiate. But when I go into another store and if I say, where was this cultivated? And they don't know, that's a red flag. If they say, it was cultivated and fill in the blank, or if they know the roots of that, there's a level of sort of the chain, right, that you're getting that from. So where is this being cultivated is an important question. I can think of another one, and I want to hear your points on it as it relates to edibles, extractions, vape pens, all of the other manners, which is how this is a concentrate, and what process was used in the making of this concentrate. Is it CO2 extracted? Is it alcohol extracted? Can you guys offer up a few more real questions that stick out to you or elaborate on those?
When it comes to extracts, that could be a whole, episode just on that.
Right.
But definitely, like, when it comes to extracts, I would say the least amount of chemicals is best. and that would be rosin. And for people that don't know, rosin is basically taking THC and using heat and pressure. And what comes out the sides is an extract that can be dabbed or smoked in a vape pen, or eaten. Chemical like extraction still seems fairly clean because in the rec market everything is tested. So it seems better than in the medical days when testing wasn't as uniform, but still you are using chemicals. And then the real big question mark is with the vape pens and the various parts that are in the vape pens and the heat that's used with those. And my understanding is that we really just don't know yet because people have to get them at a cheap price and they use all different types of things in manufacturing. So, for me, the understanding is that the safest way to consume it is to eat it or to smoke joints. And that's the safe as it gets. And then, the more complicated you get with, dabbing and vape pens, the more you lend yourself to, consuming various impurities.
And I want to jump in because I think that there's a fallacy that, oh, it's cannabis, it's a plant, it must be safe, it must be, isn't it just organic in the way that it is? And I think what we're all getting towards is, there are pesticides, there can be residual nutrients. How was something treated while it was grown? Because that's going to be systemic, it's in the plant. And there's a good chance that when you light that plant on fire, or when you concentrate it, that you too are getting some of those, toxins, poisons, what have you. Ryan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where the good thing that we, kind of bash the THC testing in a sense at the very beginning. But I think this is when asking those questions of batch testing can really educate yourself on what is in that product. As Jamal pointed earlier on, there was no testing for any residual solvents in any sort of extractable products. And now in some spots, maybe it's not required, in other areas that it is. So, asking if the product was tested for, any residual, extraction left over from that, as well as any sort of mold contamination. So sometimes people just get by with the lowest of the industry standard for testing for the most common molds out there, when you can go more above and beyond that. And then if you talk to, some growers go even a step further, and now we're starting to see more testing for heavy metals, and you mentioned like food production, that, you can only have so much heavy metal left over into that food for human consumption. We're starting to see that trend now into cannabis. So asking for any sort of testing procedure and any of that can be very helpful.
It'll also, if they talk to their bud tender about that, it'll tell them how educated they are on the products, right? If they can talk to you about testing and about, where did this come from? What cultivation is it from? The more information they have, it's like we said that we should listen to the consumer, but if the consumer also listens to, to try to wade through for any BS or real valuable information, that's important. Rachel, what are your thoughts on that? Then I'm going to move on to some packaging questions.
Yeah, so out here, I've noticed a trend. I was a purchaser in 2015, 2016, right when everything was new and unknown, really, right? And so when I was purchasing, I had certain requirements that were required from the producer processor. Like I would not carry an oil in our store unless it was 100 parts per million or less when it came to residual solvents. Granted, I would prefer the RSO rosin type of route as well, but the cleaner the better, right? But then you realize that the consumer has no idea what test results mean, what they're telling them, and things of that nature. So we have to hold our purchaser accountable when it comes to getting products into our shop, that they're providing products that are up to our par, because there's going to be a ton of products out there, but what are we standing for when it comes to the health of the consumer? Also, we have something, the Cannabis Alliance works with testing with confidence through a confidence analytics, where they can get a certification that shows that they're within the requirements of the state standards, and their products will get passed, so that they have a stamp of approval on their packaging, as well as DOH compliant products too. There's only 2 DOH compliant farms in the state out here, which is going to be Trailblazing Cannabis for like flower and concentrates, and then Fairwinds for our topicals, tinctures, and things and capsules. So those little stamps of approval on the packaging really support what the bud tender is saying, which again ties into the trust and rapport that the consumer has with the bud tender. Because I'm all about retention out here. What are we going to do that makes them drive past those other stores and come to ours? And it really boils down to the overall experience, and that you have something to substantiate what you're saying, because you can go into any type of dispensary out here and get a numerous answers, right? We want to plant those little seeds that when they leave, they want to go on Google and they kind of want to do their own research. Like, what is a terpene? What is CBN? Those little things. So that passion, excitement, and overall education with those stamps of approval really help initiate that conversation of education within the consumer.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that looking at it, do you trust the dispensary? What does this dispensary stand for? Because they're going to vet many of the products that they put on their shelves, because, you know, for us, our reputation is at stake. If we bring in a company and they get, you know, knock on wood, they go through a recall or their product is popped for something, it is a reflection on us. And so making sure that, do you trust the dispensary? Okay, and now is that how they go ahead and vet the products? You know, I would love to talk about packaging for just a couple of minutes, because there's so many beautiful products out there, right? And you look at it, ooh, fancy box, and it's got this amazing fold out, and it can do this and that, and look at how they did the childproof. What is the responsibility of the brands to also educate through their packaging? You know, and have you seen good examples of that, or what are some holdups that are around packaging?
I've tended to experience some really bold, like you said, bold colors, beautiful colors, and things of that nature. But I usually like to look towards the plainer packaging when I come in. A lot of the times I've noticed that those brighter packaging, they usually have like a lot of investment or investors in their farms, and the ones that are maybe not necessarily so brightly colored are smaller family farms that might not necessarily have the marketing money to substantiate or stand behind their product. So I usually try to tend or stray away from those brightly colored or bold packaging, because that's not really what cannabis represented when I first fell in love with it in the first place, right? It came in a Ziploc baggie when I on the corner from my friend in high school, you know. So the packaging is really, sometimes it can be kind of a smoke screen to what the product could actually be.
Yeah, and there's a lot of information I know that is expected to get on that label. So I think that for the consumer, it can almost be too much that it gets lost there. But you do make a good point about sort of the bigger the company, the better they can market. And then, you know, is there with that any sort of conflict with greenwashing or making something look better and healthier and, you know, better for them or than it maybe is? So yeah, Jamal or Ryan, do you have any thoughts on packaging? And
I mean, yeah, packaging is a tough, it's a tough topic. I agree with all the points you guys both made into all those realms. And sometimes if that greenwashing, you know, is a very large thing in cannabis industry, you see it with just the naming of strains. I mean, how many different candy strains that we can have onto the market right now, you know, and that's a very unfortunate thing, because they're targeting, you know, American consumer who have all problems with, you know, diabetes and all of those things. And so it's, that's very tough. You know, the thing that gets me with packaging, and each market's different. You go into, you know, Las Vegas, everything's pre-packaged. You don't even get a look at the full, you know, you could see a flower in the jar, but you really can't even smell it or anything. You look at it behind a piece of glass, and then you get it into these pre-packaged containers. And depending on how those containers, I mean, there's nothing wrong with the squeezed top plastic jars that we've all, used and what we saw very early on in the industry. But those jars are made for traveling. I would tell our bud tenders when we would sell our product, they're specifically instructed to take their flower out of those plastic jars, because those plastic jars is just a petroleum-based product, which is then taking away a lot of the smells, let alone not keeping any sort of humidity control within any of these packaging systems. And that can totally decrease the quality. And we do all of these things to grow this high terpenes and high THC and CBD. And then the packaging, if it sits there on the shelf for 2 months, 3 months, it's going to affect the quality, and that'll affect your user experience.
That's such a great point that you make, because unlike gummies or a vape pen, you buy an eighth of flour, and if you leave it in that container, like you touched on humidity controls, I mean, you can completely change what that product was intended to be by the cultivators. So you can even talk to your, local bud tender or whoever you trust at certain dispensaries to ask that question. How is it best to store this? What should I do? Some people like their products, I like it cured and very dry, and other people feel differently. And, I think that understanding what the difference is, or how does that taste when you are smoking it, like there's just all these sort of small points, but that add up to the whole experience. And if they don't get it correctly, then they might blame that on cannabis. Oh, it burned my throat, I didn't like it. Well, yeah, but maybe it was where it came from and how that was cultivated and how you smoked it. So I think that just shows us how complex all of this is. Jamal, did you want to talk about Rachel?
Sorry. So here in Washington, we unfortunately have it that way, where everything is pre-packaged. You can't go in and have the experience. I went to Alaska where there's vertical integration, and it was like a kid in the candy store. I was in awe. I was just completely blown away by the experience, being able to really, truly smell and experience that cannabis before I took it out of the store is amazing. So you're absolutely right. It's a huge barrier, especially with the packaging. Like you said, we have the plastic packaging. There's a lot of companies that were really pushing to use the Boveda packs in their products so that we can sustain and keep it nice and retain that moisture level in there before it gets to the consumer. So I'm always fascinated when there's that vertical integration because of that overall experience. But yeah, we definitely have that issue out here. And people leave it in the packaging. They don't even have the conversation. The bud tender doesn't even have the conversation to tell them, take it out of that packaging and put it in something more sustainable at home.
Thank you. Now, we have had a couple of questions pop up, and we have just over 15 minutes left. So if it's all right with anyone, feel free to jump back if you forgot something or you want to add it. But I just thought I'd start hitting on some of the questions. One I see here is about fast-acting edibles. Are they all the same? And what are some things to look for when searching for products that have rapid onset? Because that's tough for people to get, that it might take 45 minutes to an hour before you feel a certain way. So rapid onset has gained in popularity. What are your thoughts on those products?
Go ahead, Jamal.
This may be a shot in the dark, but I believe that like some of the gummies and like lozenges that you suck on, I guess go in, was that considered like dermally, like through your skin, like through the skin of your mouth, and that might onset a bit quicker than, through eating it, having it go like digest through your stomach.
Sure, so sublingual versus the digestive system, and that you're going to absorb it right away in your mouth. So there's some quick sticks on the market and some other drops, etc., that are there.
I also have the conversation of like metabolism. Everybody's different. So anytime someone comes up is talking edibles. I always say slow's the way to go, right? We always want to make sure that we don't want to scare people off, because usually the first time users that are coming in, they're like, I'm terrified to use edibles because this time in high school we made some brownies and I had this experience and I'm trying it again and I'm scared. So I always say slow is the way to go, and also to take in consideration what you're eating. A cookie is going to possibly affect you differently than, say, taking a tincture or an oil, and understanding that process. Also understanding what is in it. Is it a distillate that is being utilized in that edible versus saying it's CO2 extraction, or are they using BHO in that product? That also can play a part into how quickly you're going to actually feel that particular product. I always say, start off anytime you're eating something, start with the sublingual, allow it to sit under the tongue. If it's like tinctures and things of that nature, let it sit there for a second to get it pre-activated, and then swallow and allow yourself some time before you start to feel the effects.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that, for sure. It is a different experience for everybody. And edibles, I think it all started from, the brownies you would buy at the Grateful Dead concert, and then now I think that even we see the market is getting more and more consistent at dosing. And I think that the edibles are now becoming more consistent where, earlier dosing, you might get the piece that had majority of the extract sink to it in the low corner or something, and so your 25 milligram edible would just floor you. So, starting small and then understanding that it is getting more consistent. And that is where, the dosing amounts can help as an accurate guide to, finding that sweet spot.
Yeah,
And then understanding
absolutely.
why you're doing it, because I can, if I'm just eating edibles on just a day, it's lower than if I have a back injury, where then I'm just consuming so much for pain relief. So.
And they do test for homogenization, which I think is important, so that you know what you're getting when you get it. Starting on the low end, here 10 milligrams is a dose for adults in Colorado. And frankly, that's a little bit too much for me, right? And so everyone has to sort of start slow and find their sweet spot. Speaking of sweets, I have also noticed that there's a move away from like cookies, brownies, candies, gummies, all this junk food, sugar. When you have so many people who have a lifestyle of health and wellness, and that go to cannabis as an alternative to, other medications, et cetera, like to be able to offer something. And so I've noticed on the market that there are more fast acting. And then you don't necessarily have to eat a piece of candy with it. It might be, it almost looks like just a dust, an isolate, right? Or a fast acting, but an all natural gummy or a drop. Any trends that you think we're going to see coming around now in the next, 5 years? I know how quickly this market moves.
I feel like I'm going to start seeing more transdermals on the market out here. A lot of people are going to start to transition more towards not eating it at all, just really utilizing those topicals and those transdermals to kind of have that plateau of treatment throughout the day, as well as leaning more towards those RSOs. I feel like RSO is really going to start booming again, booming in the market in this out here, because people are going to try to stray away from the calories. I was in love with these caramels and I started gaining all this weight. I couldn't figure out why. Then I was like, oh yeah, I'm not just getting high, I'm also ingesting calories when it comes to eating these caramels. So I eat a lot of RSO. So I do see that transition of people going more towards just.
Oh, and your sound cut. So I didn't get the last part of that question. Sorry about that, Rachel. We'll have her jump back in when she's ready. Jamal, what do you think are some trends that are going to come around in the next couple of years?
I would completely second what Rachel is saying. The dermal patches are awesome for people that don't know. It's like a nicotine patch, but for weed. And they have CBD. They have 1-to-1, which is THC, 1 part THC, 1 part CBD, and just THC. They're awesome. It's kind of like smoking and an edible. And then when you don't want to be high anymore, you take it off, and 20 minutes later, you're fine. it's a great product. I honestly have not seen them around at that many dispensaries where I'm located, but I would be really happy to see those back around. Also, I would encourage people, if you're, using cannabis medically, to not be afraid to eat RSO oil. You can just take a little bit, put it on your tongue, no calories. It gets you super lit, and it actually has a really clean high. It's almost like if you like drinking and you want to have like vodka and like tonic or something like that. It's really clean and it gets the job done.
Ryan?
I was going to say transdermal right when you asked the question. But I think that we're going to find other consumption mechanisms. I know we've seen, inhalers in the market that are really fast acting, and then the high is gone, like consistently 45 minutes later. And those, are pretty consistent for people's metabolism. Their highs might be a little bit different effects, but as far as like how long that lasts, that you're starting to see more consistent delivery mechanisms out there onto the market. And then, you see in other places, I don't think it'll trend in the US, but you do, from a health benefit, you see a lot of suppositories still making large trends from a health situation, especially in Europe, where I think that there's a little less taboo when it comes to, those sort of oral ingestion methods.
So, and I would like to see a little bit more put on who's the cultivator, how was this cultivated, right? And I'm hoping that the Cannabis Certification Council, we're looking to get and launch our organic cannabis standard and that certification, and I think there has to be a way to let the consumer know that this was grown responsibly. So and I think that in the short term, what some people are doing is QR codes that'll take you to the farm and that'll show you where that's from, or talk a little bit more about how that product was grown for people that are interested. But I think that there's going to be, that split in the differentiation of, is there an organic and sustainable consumer? Especially now, I think we have an older demographic sort of stepping to cannabis. There are more moms, women my age, than there are new 20-year-olds coming into the shop. The 20-year-olds are all already smoking, right? Or they're already using it. But it's the new demographic where we're going to see the 65 and over, people who are looking for alternative medicine, people who are recovering, from other addictions, that they can find a safer space there. So I'd like to think so. Now I'm going to peruse the side here of the chat that's been coming up and make sure that I haven't forgotten about any questions that were brought up. I'm glad that you mentioned humidity control, Rachel. Thank you. And then packaging. I think, it really comes down to, you've got to trust the dispensary you're going to, and the only way you're going to do that, Jamal, I loved your analogy about the butcher, right? When you go somewhere, you know what it looks like, how clean it is, the quality of the people that are serving you. You can take a look at the product, and then if you go home and you're still satisfied, but you probably had a pretty good experience, but go somewhere else just so you have something to judge that off of, and then probably stick with and be loyal to who you can trust, whether it be the purchasers or the cultivator, etc. Anyone have some last minute thoughts they want to put in for the group?
I would say, encourage people to buy outdoor cannabis if you can. It's grown with the sun. It's much more sustainable than growing indoors. It's natural. It's irie, it has a different vibe to it. Be aware you don't want to buy it when it's too old. So after about 6 months after the harvest, which is about October or so, then you might be a little wary of it. But, from November through the winter time, I would just encourage people to smoke outdoor pot. It's natural, it's grown with the sun, and that's how it was meant to be grown.
Thanks. That's a great last point. Panelists, we do have to sort of kick it over to our sponsors so that they can say a couple of things. But I think, this has been wonderful. You're all available on the social media and the web. People have more questions, so they want to reach out to you. I believe the contact information will also be under the Happy Plants series on the website, where this is linked, so that people can continue to watch this content. So I will turn it over. I believe it's Claire, you're jumping in.
Yeah, hey, thank you so much, Amy.
Welcome.
You guys, I am blown away by the caliber of this panel and just hearing about the work that everyone is doing to really elevate and educate our industry as a whole. My name is Claire, and I work with Boveda to save the terps. We are incredibly honored to be able to sponsor the Cannabis Certification Council in a Happy Plant series. If you guys aren't familiar, Boveda is a really simple two-way humidity control that creates that all-natural shield of purified water vapor to protect terpenes until you're ready to grind, smoke, and experience your cannabis. So using Boveda, like I said, it's super, super simple. You just pop this little package into your container and you can rest assured that your cannabis and those terpenes, aromas, flavors, and effects are protected from evaporation. So be sure to check us out at Boveda Cannabis on social. We even have a TikTok channel if you're into that. And if you have any questions, feel free to DM us anytime to learn more. So thanks again so much for the opportunity, Ben, Amy, everybody at the council. It's really great to be able to listen in and participate in this important discussion.
Thank you so much, Claire. From Boveda, thank you again, Rob from Smokey's Cannabis Company, Rachel, Ryan, Jamal, such an interesting conversation. Thank you so much for adding so much to this. Amy, you did a fantastic job. I'm going to plug our organically grown certification that's coming out later this year. And stay tuned for upcoming Happy Plants episodes. Our next one is going to be on 3/17. So March 17th, keep an eye out for our next episode. And thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. We're really excited to keep bringing you exciting content like this.
Right. Thank you so much, everybody. This was fantastic. I appreciate it. I appreciate you donating your time to this conversation. So enjoy your evening and thanks so much.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.